student success. For those of you who are not familiar with GoToWebinar, there are a variety of ways that you can ask questions and use the control panels, expand and contract using the plus or minus signs in the upper left-hand corner. If you have questions, please raise your hand and I will get to you. I want to briefly just thank all of you for being here today, and hope that you take a lot out of this webinar, and thank Council for Resource Development for helping to lead this webinar in collaboration with Achieving the Dream. And I'll do a formal introduction of Perry Hammock, who's joining us today in just a minute. Brief run-through of the agenda. We're going to do some introductions and some reminders. We have some colleges on the call today that are that are part of the WFSNCC initiative and some that are not. So some of the updates and reminders will be specific to that group of colleges and less so for the others, but we are certainly happy that all of you are participating today, WFSNCC college or not. Then we'll lead into the presentation by Perry and close with Q&A. So very briefly, my name is Julian Haynes. I'm an Associate Director of Programs here at Achieving the Dream, helping to lead the expansion of the WFSNCC initiative alongside Ulysses Shildnick, who's an Assistant Director of Programs here at Achieving the Dream. So I'd like to briefly introduce our speaker for today, who'll be leading the webinar. His name is Perry Hammock. He is an Executive Director of the Indiana Bicentennial Commission. He's prior to joining the Commission in March 2014, he spent 33 years at Ivy Tech Community College, the bulk of that time as Executive Director of the Ivy Tech Foundation, which is the college's fundraising arm. He has served on statewide, national, and international boards, including many years on the board of CRD, which is a 2-year college fundraising organization and the largest council of AACC, as well as 8 years on the board of directors of CFRE International, the global credentialing body for fundraising professionals. So we are very pleased to have Perry with us today to talk with us about fundraising efforts, identifying ways to become more sustainable organizations and identify diverse sources of revenue to support all of the important work that we do. So some brief reminders for the WFSNCC colleges that are on this call. There's a WFSNCC Financial Coach Training Session number 2 that you've no doubt received a number of reminder emails from APD about. That will be June 3rd to the 5th, 2015 at Pulaski Technical College in Arkansas. We do have another upcoming webinar, Behavioral Economics and Financial Education, and this will be hosted by Irrational Labs and will take place on June 9th. We will send out registration information for that webinar. And then the year-end compliance, we are nearing the end of the first year of WFSNCC, with the exception of the new LA colleges. And the compliance forms that we sent you a little while ago will be due to Achieving the Dream by July 31, 2015. Very briefly, the fundraising requirements for the initiative, the goal per consortium is $200,000. So if you were to break it out by college, $50,000 per college. It can be a combination of new funding from third-party donors or reallocating institutional funds. And there will be some flexibility regarding the ratio of new funds to reallocated institutional funds. We will not include in-kind support as being a part of that can be used toward meeting your fundraising requirements. Any questions about the fundraising requirements, please contact ATD directly, and we'd be happy to talk with you more about what these fundraising requirements are and what some promising practices have been in some of the other colleges in the consortia to date on these fundraising efforts. So with that, I'd like to, again, thank you all for joining the webinar today, and apologies for getting started a little bit late. That is, I'm kind of a newbie to leading GoToWebinar, and was talking to myself, and I believe just Perry for a good 5 minutes before we actually got started, unknowingly. So welcome again to Perry, and I will let him take it from here. And Perry, I will be controlling the slides, so just let me know when you'd like me to go to the next slide.
Okay, thanks, Julian. Can you? I hope you can
Sure.
hear me. Can you hear me, Julian?
I can hear you, Perry, yes.
Okay, so everybody can. Hey, welcome. Thank you. This is an interesting experience for me. I kind of feed on audience feedback, and so since you're not there, it's sort of like doing radio. So pretend I'm Howard Stern or someone better than you're listening to today, but I'll be happy to do my best for you. So. You know, my purpose today is to talk to you specifically about the asking event, asking for money, how you figure out who to ask, how to do the ask, how to follow up with it, because I think, Julian, if you'll go to the next slide, you know, the issue, if you look at Giving USA, that Americans give plenty of money. There's so much money out there, $300 billion plus last year. Over $40 billion went to education. So money is not the issue, Julian. Next slide, please. Okay, asking is. So I want to talk about that particular part about it. Now, you'll notice, I don't know if you have access to these slides, but my Surgeon General's warning is that these do contain copyrighted materials, and it's okay in a classroom situation, but if you copy or distribute them, realize that you are violating copyright laws from some of the far side jokes that are in here, not necessarily my materials. Okay, Julian, next, please. So, I mean, here's some givings about asking for money, and there's so much trepidation out there about it, but really it's not that big a deal. The nice thing is when you go out and talk to people about money is you're talking with nice people. You're talking with people who want to make a difference, who know from whence their fortunes came or where their community strengths come, and they want to be part of that. So it's not like you're going out and meeting with a lot of ogres on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, I always said in fundraising in my 33 years at the college that I really had the best job there because I never dealt with disgruntled students or unhappy faculty or unionization problems or anything. I dealt with people who wanted to make a difference, and the only thing that we did was try to match what we had as far as opportunities with their desire to make an impact on their community or to give back in some way, to pay back for what they feel that they've received. Now, the other nice thing about giving is it's committed people give other people that opportunity. It's like the last great Ponzi scheme in that if you get a cadre of 3 or 4 donors, those donors will tell 2 or 3 other people. Next thing you know, you have a dozen interested people and can branch out from there. I think it's also important to remember as you think about the asking event is that it's just as easy to ask for big money as small money. I'll show you in the slides that it's the same amount of time, it's the same amount of preparation, it's the same amount of getting ready, and it's the same amount of time in the room. So why wouldn't we go out and talk to people about making a transformational difference in your college? The difference we want to talk about today is the difference between philanthropists and donors. And the major difference is donors give from the heart and philanthropists give from the head. So if you think about that, several years ago, Bill Gates was asked by a group that was dealing with the homeless, that with all his wealth, why didn't he just feed everyone in the Seattle area for a year and then they could eliminate that problem? And he said, well, he said, I hate to, you know, I consider myself to be a philanthropist. I work upstream of current day problems. And I think that's what you're going to find as we talk about asking people for money. Giving from the heart is an annual fund request, is coming to a dinner, but making an investment in your students through an endowment or endowing a program or a faculty chair or a major contribution to a capital campaign is where we're talking about people who are thinking about how your project fits in their vision of a better world, of a better place to live. And that's the important part. Next slide, please. So, you know, some people think it's a very difficult process. Actually, for all of you out there, I can promise you that it's only 30 seconds different from what you do anyway. Everyone likes to talk about their colleges. Everyone likes to talk about their students and brag on their faculty and talk about their vision for the future of how they can be a better partner in the community. And there's really only 30 seconds different from that. You can rest assured that although it is an art, and I think some of us feel more capable of supporting that art, there's also quite a bit of science, and we'll talk about a lot of that today as we look back at sales theory and people who have been doing a wonderful humanistic organized sales for years can teach us a lot. It's all about just getting that collection of sending the people out to talk to the right people at the right time for the right cause and ask for the right amount. And that's what makes it complicated. It's not complicated. It's just doing your background research as you would prepare to go into take an exam or to talk to your board of directors or to meet with the faculty senate. It's the same thing that we're talking about here, so let's keep that in mind. Next slide, please. The big thing about fundraising is the number one thing is that people have to give first. You know, you can't ask if you don't give. People have to be on board. Why would someone else in the community give if we don't support it ourselves? And I know this is kind of preaching to the choir, but by the same token, what percentage of your board gives? In my current situation, we were just invited to present a $1 million proposal to a granting foundation out of cycle. So they've said they really want to be part of this. One of the things they ask is what percentage of your board gives. My board was appointed by political enterprise, so right now I have less than 50%. And I hope that that doesn't kill my entire proposal when they look at that and say, why aren't these folks giving? And I hope that you will understand that the same thing happens when you talk to people in the community. They know who give. It's in your annual report. Foundations will ask you specifically. This particular foundation proposal asked for what percentage gave in the last year, what the percentage of attendance was at board meetings, and what the average of the gifts were of those who gave. So if you're not comfortable sharing that, then probably there's some work to do at home before you go out and talk to people who have big money and the opportunity to make big changes. And remember, too, it's all about this concept of proportional sacrificial giving. You know, you don't approach it by asking everyone on your board or in your community to give $1,000. That's not the way it works. For some people, $1,000 is quite a stretch, and for some people, $1,000 is almost pocket change. So it's about giving people to consider what they can do and kind of work in that domain. When I was at the college, we did our giving club for employees on a percentage basis. We asked all of our employees to give 1% of their salary back, and we started with the president. And the president was the first person in that giving club, and the next person who signed up actually was one of our lowest paid maintenance folks who said to me that he'd never been able to be in the same kind of a giving club with the president and how important he thought it was. He got everybody else in the maintenance department to be part of that giving club because it wasn't about how much they gave, but how much they gave of what they had. Next slide, please. So in that philosophy of how do we get everybody to be on board, so what about boards of directors and what do we do? It's harder, I know, as I mentioned, with an appointed board or an elected board. So let's talk about your foundation board. And even in there, do all of them ask for money? Some colleges have a philosophy that there's a bifurcation or a trifurcation of effort. Some people govern, some people manage, some people ask. It's a difficult thing because who wants to be in the asking group if you can be in the managing group? But if you do have that board where we consider the development committee to be the committee of the whole because everybody needs to be out there asking for money in some way with us as a team, then what we try to do is set the culture early, match new board members with a mentor, somebody who does fit into your perspective of the asking process and is participating. We have to make sure that they know enough about the college, that they know enough stories so they can be passionate. Do you help them? We do board training seminars for people when they came on our board about how to do their elevator speech, and we took them around campus. We made sure at every meeting there was a student and a faculty member who presented just for a moment so they could figure out which stories resonated the best with them, because those are the stories they'll be comfortable telling in public and telling when they're making a fundraising call. We generally start board members out by thanking. Getting them to thank people is a wonderful way to break them into the habit of asking, because if they can reach out and they have to learn about what someone did, they have to make a call to them or send them a note, then I think it really works best for them. And we had a whole process for this. When I was at the college, you know, everybody who made a gift over $1,000, and that was several hundred a year, we had a big board, would get a phone call from a board member. And we taught them a pattern. We had them even leave messages on answering machines if they wanted to, so that they could just say, hi, I'm Perry Hammock. I'm on the Foundation Board of Directors. I'm so appreciative of what you've done. Your gift will change lives and really help us fulfill our vision of service to the community. Thank you again for what you've done. That's all it takes. Once they got used to that, then they were happy going out and asking people for more because it got them in the mode of things. We didn't send board members out alone. We always went with a team so questions could be answered about the college. We make sure assignments fit. We didn't cold call lists or assign lists. Who are people comfortable talking to? Who do they want to go with them? What's the team? and we always provided some training. Next slide, Julian. And presidents, I know that for you presidents out there, asking for money, being part of fundraising, I think I remember the AACC study correctly, was like the highest weighted aspect of a president's evaluation or of their hiring, and one of the smallest actual performance indicators that was evaluated when they're in the job. So those on the hiring side have some problem with attitude and action there, but generally you're always going to be judged by, are you a fundraising president? And I think the important thing to remember when we get through the 30-second difference, that it's only 30 seconds different from what you do 5 times a day at Rotary, at breakfasts, at dinners, at luncheons, at pinning ceremonies, at graduation. Presidents are the keepers of the vision for the organization, and they can't abdicate that responsibility. The community knows the institution by its president, and the best thing a current president can do is make sure they don't remember the previous president, because their vision may have been different, it may not have worked well, but you are the keeper of the long-term attainable but stretch goals for the organization in its service back to the community. It's often hard for presidents to focus. There's so much to talk about. There's so many things going on. In the fundraising environment, it's focus, focus, focus. You're going to have about 8 minutes to get through your part of a half-an-hour meeting, and if you're not focused, you'll find out that your 8 minutes is gone, your half an hour is up, and you really didn't accomplish anything in that particular meeting. Presidents tend to calendar far in advance. I think that's very wise. It's wise in fundraising. The folks that we need to talk to go to Florida for the wintertime or vacation at the beach in the summer. They have other engagements. We need to make sure we get on their calendar. But the fact with if you get on their calendar is that you never cancel. Once you cancel with them, getting back in is 5 times harder than it was to get the meeting in the first time. So you have to make sure that you don't cancel. Whether you block out a period of time that's sacrosanct in your schedule and nobody gets to it, or whether you just make sure that those things are ironclad, you really can't cancel, because it shows where they are in the importance tree, and it's really important that they be right at the top, because they are bringing in those resources that are most difficult to find. And I think it's always important to report back to the board. They need to know what you're doing. They need to see how the light is being shown upon your institution and how people are or aren't responding to that, because that brings up issues that the board may need to think about. Okay, so next slide. The bottom line of all this really is that if you're not out there asking for money, you create your own problems, and it becomes sort of an endless loop or a whirlpool that's hard to get out of. If you're not asking people in the community for money, you're basically telling them that everything's wonderful. You're right on top of your mission. You get all the technology you need. You're great in studies. You're great in service. All your students and faculty are supported. It basically means you don't need any more money. So for those who have trepidation about going out in the community, realize that if you're not out in the community asking for money, they assume full well that you have plenty. And if you suddenly start asking, it's good to be first time, and you can say, well, we don't come out unless we have to, and here we are. But they expect that, because other people in your environment are doing the same thing. And if you do it once and then don't continue, you will fall off their radar. We had a capital campaign in one of our most popular campuses, raised a ton of money. They had a wonderfully successful capital campaign, and then the president declared victory and said, we'll not be out to ask you for any more money, so they didn't. 7 years later, we started up another campaign. They hadn't really been out in the community, and they had to start all over again. And actually, they raised less money than the first time, because people were like, oh yeah, we never really heard enough back about what happened, and we figured that everything was taken care of, so why are you back to see us now? So the simple act of being out talking with people and seeking their support is important in and of itself to kind of make sure that you keep on the radar of what you could do if you had more, because that's an important thing. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the key predictors of success. And for those of you like me that will be sending David Letterman off tomorrow night, we can also think back to Johnny Carson and his time, and as he was Karnak, the great musician. So let's talk about some ways that you can predict success. Next slide, please. There's a number of studies done. There was one done by the Indiana School of Philanthropy that you can look at. There's some other studies that have been done through AACC and Association of Governing Boards. But here's some reasons why people make their gifts. They give primarily in prima facie because they believe in what you're doing. Now these are big gifts, not the annual fund where you get $100. We're talking about big gifts, 5, 6-figure gifts, transformational gifts. They believe in what you're doing. They know who you are. They believe in that dynamism of the leadership, the vision that the president is carrying, who's on your board. If you've had feasibility studies done, one of the things that we do oftentimes in that pre-interview or pre-campaign solicitation interviews is to find out who do you know, how do you know the people who are on board with the college, your important educators, your important faculty, your important staff, and your important board members. It's nice that you can prove that you have financial solidity, not that you necessarily have lots of money or you wouldn't be asking them, but that you're rubbing the buffalo off the nickel before you spend it, you're making the eagle squeal before you spend the dollar. One of the reasons why people make gifts, and studies have shown, is because of the presentation, that it's clear, that it's focused, that the right people were there, and they exhibited the 3 E's, and this comes a lot from some of the work in sales theory: empathy, energy, and enthusiasm. That you are empathic, meaning that you understand how they want to fit into this, and that you truly believe in what you do. Conversely, and if we can go to the next slide, if you look at why gifts weren't made, why people were not successful in their fundraising, you can see that, next slide please, that the #1 reason why was there's no relationship. Why are you here? So when you consider the act of fundraising, remember that friend raising comes first. And if people don't know you, and I could give you some really bad examples from my history of people who barged in on the first meeting, had dinner, donor and the wife, and said, boy, it'd be great if you could just give us $1 million, we'll put your name on a building. And the response from that donor was very pointed, and that was kind of the end of that relationship. How dare you come in here without us knowing you and ask you for that kind of money? And they certainly could have afforded it. So relationship, finding out what their interests are, getting the right people to go, whether that's, people are on their different political views, different cultural views, have been on the wrong side of a community issue, may not be the right people to go and talk to those individuals. You find other people. Wrong amount generally is probably less important, because people will tell you that's too much unless you make it by a factor, like asking for 3 or 4 times what they could possibly give you. Timing sometimes is a problem. I had a donor that I was getting ready to ask for a significant gift here for a project that we're putting on, and he passed away. Now that's pretty dramatic, but the timing can also be business downturn. Their company has had some sort of setback. You need to find these things out. You may just want to go talk to them, not necessarily asking them for money. And lack of persistence. Oftentimes with donors, it's 3 to 5 to 7 visits. It's over a year. It's a long time before they actually come around to yes. And that's because you have to build all those reasons why gifts are not made into reasons why gifts are made. So not being persistent, taking no for an answer, is probably really a bad idea. It's not now. Next slide, please. We have to consider, too, in the process of what you're actually selling. And I don't, again, I use sales because I think it's important. We're all selling something, or I don't think we're helping the organization. So what are you offering? The projects, the proposals that we put together have to be short and pithy. They have to be compelling. They have to be put together nicely. They don't have to be in gold-edged paper or anything like that, but they have to be coherent and easily understandable on kind of 2 or 3 levels. Some people read them from the front. Some people read them from the back. Some people don't want to read them at all. Some people won't look at more than half a page. That's also part of knowing who your donors are. But you also have to be able to do this algorithm. My son-in-law is a computational physicist and can tell you that most anything can be solved by a complex enough algorithm. And I think that's the same thing with fundraising. You have your current situation. You have money you're getting perhaps from the state or from grants or from other things. And then there's a gap, which is that community funding. And then on the right side of the equal sign is some sort of change, some sort of success that can be expressed in measurable human terms that benefit back to the community. And without that kind of a basic algorithm, you're talking about feel-good things. Nobody cares that you have a better nursing program. They care that they have 10 more trained nurses that come out into the community. They care that you have the technology that allows them to have new study techniques, a better experience, that the resuscitantes you want to buy will help them reduce their, increase the amount of time they spend in a laboratory environment, so they're working on real-world problems. That's what matters to the community. So always think when you're doing your proposal preparation, it's what they care about, not what you care about. Next slide. And you remember that donors care about, that they don't care about existing programs so much. You know, why aren't you supporting the programs you already have? They don't care about incremental improvement. They want to make big change. They want to be part of change. It's what they do in their businesses. It's what they do in their community involvements every day. They don't tend to fund things in which they don't have any interest. Now, you might be able to change that over time, but in a short term, if they're not interested in athletics and sports, then you're probably better off not approaching them for the new baseball diamond. And they don't tend to fund projects that you may be really passionate about but don't make sense to them, meaning that if you explain them in pedagogical terms or explain them in internal terms to their college, that may not make sense to them in a community. Why do you want that? Why do you need that? Next slide, please. So where do I want you to focus your time? For the period of time we're talking about, focus your time on making these personal asks, which that's where the money is. You know, I'll relate to Pareto's law several times, but you want to focus on the 20% that can do the 80%. If you look at capital campaigns now, it used to be that 20% of your donors made 80% of your gifts. Now it's pushing more like 10-90, but those statistics are skewed by the 4-year mega universities that are raising billions of dollars. When we did our campaigns, I can look back at 25 different capital campaigns, we averaged about 33% of our donors gave 66% of our money. Our top gift was maybe 5% of campaign, maybe 2% of campaign. So the big numbers that you see for these mega campaigns, we oftentimes didn't see them. So that donor pyramid was a little more kind of a bowed in the middle. We didn't have as many tiny gifts either, or as many huge gifts, but we had more gifts in that broad midsection of our donor population. You focus on those people who are thinking with their heads because they can see the ability to make a long-term pledge to make a lasting difference. You want leaders in your community of opinion, leaders of action, leaders of movements, not necessarily ones with the biggest money, but those people too who have leverage, who have access. Sometimes it's people who have the ability, but they're not necessarily one of your friends, and you may wish to focus on them because a detractor can get 2 or 3 other people perhaps not to give, that if they're at least being quiet about your institution, those others might support you. And we're not going to work on the annual fund people. So let's talk about strategy. That's what we want to move into. Next slide, please. What we always did at our institution, and you'll hear this by different names, we called it I&E, the Identification and Evaluation Session. Some of them call them donor evaluation sessions, whatever they might be, for your prospective donors. We want to think about how and when and where to approach these individuals. Now remember, when we talk about donors, again, Pareto's law, 80% of your next gifts will come from a current donor. So you should spend about 80% of your time on current donors and about 20% of your time on prospects. So as we talk about identification and evaluation, this is not inside information. This is not things that people wouldn't normally know. We generally get a group of people, a few people from the outside, and talk about some folks who you may have on your radar as being important graduates, important vendors, important in the community, people you wish supported you that did not, and to talk about them a little bit. So this team, including your volunteers, takes some ownership of the process of figuring out the LAI, and this is another kind of inside baseball term, but it's really important. How are they linked to you? Are they a graduate? Are they a vendor? Their wife is a member of the faculty. How are they linked to you? Do they have the ability to make a gift at this point in time? Because although philanthropy technically means the love of mankind, and although I love all my donors and prospects equally, I tend to spend my time with people with money who have the ability to make a gift relatively soon. And do you have projects in what you're presenting to them that will meet their philanthropic interests? We want to think about not what they will probably do. And people say, oh, they'll only do $1,000. Well, that's not necessarily the case. What could they do if we moved them with our presentation, with our case for support, with our passion? What could they do over a 3 to 5 year period? The trend in philanthropy now is longer-term pledges, which has some issues with it itself, but our pledge rate for 5-year pledges was always very high. So sometimes you can encourage people to perhaps do something more meaningful and significant by giving them a longer period of time with which to work. And so that's important. And then you also want to talk about in these sessions kind of the strategy, the team of people. Who should be asking that? You know, Joe's Lumber Company, you know, Joe doesn't make the decisions anymore. He's passed it all down to his son, Sam. But Joe really controls the philanthropy. So you really ought to get Joe and Sam together in the same room so that you can bank off how much they can do and who wants to do it. So these sessions don't have to be long. I've seen in some of these cases as many as 30 or 40 donors, prospects gone through in kind of an hour to kind of come up with, and sometimes if it's painful, maybe 2 or 3. This isn't information that, again, we're having trouble with sharing. The Donor Bill of Rights says if a donor comes in and asks for the information that you have on them, you're duty bound to share that. So it's not anything other than, you know, we think they could do this, here's where they're tied in, and information that you would share if you felt compelled to do so. Let's talk about the next slide. Everybody thinks that you can go online and get this, and I promise you it's not really true. If you look at your online research and what you do, online you can find out how are they linked to you, perhaps, as you look at their LinkedIn profile, if you looked at their Facebook pages, if you look at their company profiles, their foundation profiles, you can find out where their interests lie. Oftentimes you can find their networks by what groups and clubs and organizations they belong to. We really want to know, oftentimes when we're looking at someone, how are they connected back? Do we know someone on their corporate board or on their foundation board, or is there a connection back to us through a board or organization? Sometimes you can find out their obligations by a newspaper article that says, you know, Joe and Frida Smith make $1 million pledge to the YMCA, and you may be able to look and then see if that was done over a period of time, or you can assume it might have been done over a period of time. You can oftentimes get history. You know, we can do a 15-minute web search, and I remember doing one on a very influential person that we had no knowledge of at all, and finding out that, you know, they were chair of their neighborhood association, they lived in a historic home, and that their passion was NASCAR racing, and they owned a second-tier NASCAR team, and the wife actually drove in that second tier. So that gave the president the chance to put the team together of another person we had who was a big fan of historic preservation and someone from our faculty who was into racing, and they were able to establish a rapport over a period of time with that donor. Now, some people think you can push a button and find out how much money they have and whether they can give it or not. And I think there are some, you can get some pointers from things like Wealth Engine and some of those things, but actually, in my humble mind, you'll find out more about that from people who sit around tables saying, this is what they've done. People who have tremendous wealth oftentimes take care of putting things into trusts, having things gone through by their financial advisors, and you oftentimes can't find out where their money is or how much they have that's loose and available. So I see it more as another piece of information, but if you ever have the chance to do a Wealth Engine kind of search or another company like that, before you buy it, search for yourself, search for your mom, search for your dad, and see, and you'll find that there are instances where you may think that they can give you a lot more money than they can, and some where you think they can certainly do more than that. So I think it's one data point, but not really a lot of that. So taking all that out of it, if we go back and go to the next slide, just remember the important thing in this whole process of figuring out what there is about your donor to find out, next slide please, is that donors care about the right person asking them, a friend, a colleague, or a passionate volunteer, that what you're asking for is valid and strong, that you have a trust, that you have vision, and that the person who calls on them is knowledgeable, is considerate of their time, and is passionate in how they present that. Because I think it's a two-way street here. Remember, it's not just about the donor. There's a certain amount of etiquette involved. Next slide, please. And the etiquette of asking, in my mind, is this, that you are asking people for a project that changes lives. You're not coming in asking them for a cost plus or a small change. You're asking them for something that is visionary, that you have the ability, if they want it, to dollarize the value of the project. This will create 10 more nurses. Our endowment will increase our graduation rate by 5%. That means we have 20 more people in the community. They go out on an average first-year salary of $35,000. That's $750,000 that we're bringing back into the community from this investment. That's dollarization and happens all the time in sales. that we promise that we are committed and passionate, that we have made our pledge. If we're in a campaign, like if you need to raise this $200,000, that you've already won that campaign on paper. People now worry, people who are in the philanthropic business, who give away money from their family foundations, worry about being the first one in if that project doesn't succeed. Who are your capstones? Who else do you have planned out there? Do you have this campaign already kind of put in place? You just need to make the calls, and if you follow up with the calls, you'll be able to win the campaign. They like to, and the etiquette is also that we did our homework on them. All the things that I've talked about linkage and ability and interest. My wife is a teacher and a very good 8th grade teacher, and she gives to her alma mater every year, and they always have a student who calls, and usually from her hometown, and always a history major, and talks about what her dreams are and what's going on. My wife always writes a check. And then one year they got a call, and it was from a paid consultant who was making phone calls for them, and had to disclose that at first, and then asked her for 10 times as much as she'd given every year. And she actually hung up the phone on him, and my wife talks to telemarketers for a half an hour on a regular basis because it violated her terms. They should have known that this is the way they were approaching her, and that's why she gave. They should have looked into that perhaps, but because they changed it, it really kind of ruined the experience for her. And all of a sudden they weren't offering her that something transformational. Before it was transforming one student's life. Now it was just $10,000 towards $1 million campaign. And to her that violated some of the basic etiquette. One of the best places, those of you who are in the organization, in the area where there are mega colleges, your 4-year colleges and billion-dollar campaigns, I promise you, and this is a whole different discussion for a different time, do not be timid about asking for money in those locations. In our state, in Indiana, we had 4 major colleges where we also had campuses, and we raised more money in those communities than most other areas of the state. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but just let me say that you offer the opportunity to be more transformational with $50,000 than people do as the $50,000 piece of a $1 billion campaign, which makes it like 0.00005%. So we have that opportunity to be part of it. Okay, ready? Let's talk about making the ask. Showtime, folks. The most important thing is getting the meeting. Next slide, please. So, this is kind of a joke. 85% is of getting a gift is getting the meeting. It's probably 100%. If you don't get a chance to talk to people, they may just send you a check. But a big part of your success is making sure you get the meeting. We don't need to sit down. I'll just send you a check. How much do you need? Well, remember, they're talking now about the annual fund money and this whole kind of $1,000 that everybody passes around from one group to the other. You're calling to make a prospectus to them for an investment, for a charitable investment. Getting a face-to-face meeting is still the way it's done. You can make the call. It's better if your volunteer makes the call. In some cases, I have seen, and Gerald Panis, who I'll refer a particular book to you at the end of this, who's kind of one of the modern gurus of fundraising, says you can send a letter of intent. Now, this isn't a fundraising letter. This is a letter of intent for people that you just can't get through to on the phone. Hey, George, this is Fred. The college is really doing some great things. They've got a project I know you want to hear more about. You'll get a call in a couple of days from Perry Hammock, who's the executive director of the foundation, and I hope you'll take the call and you'll find 30 minutes, just 30 minutes, to sit down and talk with them. It's an important thing. It'd be a favor to me if you did it. Now, that's the letter of intent. That can also be the referral call, but the fact of the matter is talking to someone on the telephone is 20 times more effective than sending them a letter. You always suggest times. You always suggest a couple of options. We're looking at some times during the week of June 1st. How about the 2nd in the morning, or would Wednesday the 3rd in the afternoon work? The reason you suggest times versus just saying, could we get together, is if you propose one time, they can just say no. Your answer is yes or no. If you propose 2 times, you're giving them an either or, and people tend to select one of 2 options versus just saying no. Now, they may say that whole week is out, then you come back with a couple of other times from your calendar, and that's important to get the phone call. It's very difficult. Now, we have major donors, big donors, who all their scheduling is done by their assistants, and that's part of what you find out in this identification and evaluation session. And if their calendars are truly run and truly led by their assistant, then you find out a way to get to their assistant and you work that out. There are donors that I knew their assistants for 20 years, and I knew I could call them and get on the calendar because they had that level of trust. But you generally, if at all possible, want to get to the actual person making the agenda. You know, there are people, and you will hear this, and I know, and this is a debated point, about do you do it over food? There are people that raise good money over breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I know college presidents that if they have a luncheon free on their calendar, consider it a failed day because that's where they use the time to do their outreach, do their major gift solicitations. I prefer not to do donor interactions around food because it provides a number of series of distractions. If you're in a public location, these people know everybody and everybody wants to see them, and you may lose control of the meeting from that perspective. If you've ever had a cup of coffee spilled in your lap, if you've ever had something spilled down your back, if you've ever bumped into something in your barbecue went in your lap, you'll know that when that happens, your meeting is over. So, use your own judgment there. But if you raise money over food, control the situation. Take the seat that faces out into the room, get a corner table so that they face into the wall, so maybe people won't come by as much. Always know what you're going to order when you get there, and order something really easy to eat. Order something really small. You're not there to eat, and trust me, if you get a heavy stomach, you don't do as well as if you have a light stomach. You can eat later. You're there to be with them and try to get something quick versus a 4-course meal where your whole focus is on food. Another key thing about getting the meeting is I knew you'd want to hear more. I know how important your opinion is. I'd like to get your input on things before we talk about going forward. Now, don't mislead them into think you're coming to talk about something if you're actually going to be there to ask for money, but you want their involvement too. So make sure that in what you're providing, they know that you're giving them information. Next slide. So before you get to the visit, remember, here's kind of a recap. We've done our pre-planning. We've talked about the evaluation, what we think we're going to ask for, what we think the right approach is, what the strategy is as far as which of our projects are we presenting this potential donor. You've already made your gift, so you can walk in there full well knowing that you're not asking other people to do what you won't do. You've got your team together, or you're going by yourself. The team may be a team of one, but generally there's more than one person on that team. And you've already planned out. This is sales theory again. In sales theory, you always have a best possible outcome, a minimal acceptable outcome, an alternate offer. And I think that's a good way to be with fundraising. If you get in and your first 5 minutes realize that scholarships is not going to work because this person says, which I've had donors that say, people always talk about doing things. I worked my way through school for 6 years and nobody helped me a bit, and I'll be damned if I'm helping anybody else. They should figure out a way to get a job and go through school. Well, that may not be the scholarship, so it's nice to maybe have an equipment or a technology or something else in your hip pocket. And by the same token, when you're interested, hey, yeah, you're the technical college, and boy, I tell you, technology is changing so fast. Every time you open a computer, it's obsolete. What a waste of money. Well, then that may not be the person that you want to talk to. And then you always have an exit strategy, that if things start going really sour, you have a hand signal, you have a phrase that you know you're going to go away from. You're not going to ask on this visit. You're going to go to the minimum acceptable outcome, which may just be a visit to campus or coming to hear a seminar on the technology in their area. Coming to graduation. Graduation is such an important thing for donors that you may find that you go to that immediately. And I always recommend, always recommend that you ride together to the visit. That way you've got 15 or 20 minutes together to fine-tune things, to make sure that you got your strategy down. This is an important 30 minutes. It's only 30 minutes, but you've put several hours of pre-planning into this. So you want to make sure that you're as successful as you humanly can be. And you may be really, really nervous, and writing together the visit is a good way of controlling nerves. So let's talk about nerves for a moment. Next slide, please. Nerves are good. When I was in my graduate program, I worked with a program to work on speech, what they call speech anxiety or communication apprehension. And speaking in front of public is one of the top 10 fears, has always been in the world. Some people are less scared about dying than they are of talking in front of a group of people. And fundraising can fall into that same kind of category. Just remember that you should be nervous when you go in. Adrenaline is good. It sharpens your senses. It makes you quicker on your feet. It helps you. And sometimes it even sounds like passion with that crack in your voice that's coming from nerves. And you're only nervous a couple of times and you get better. Too much of it, it's not good. If you're really, really nervous about this, then you're not going to be able to function. But why would you be nervous? Again, this is not their first rodeo. I promise you, any of the people we're talking about, you're not the first one to ask them for money. They wouldn't have accepted the visit. They know that you're in the business of asking for money because you're from a nonprofit organization, and they know you have projects, and they read the paper, and they have friends who've talked to them. And unless they're the first person you've ever talked to, their friends will have told them that your college came out and either did a good or bad job in the presentation. So the only reason to be nervous is because you're not ready. You don't have your strategy, your team, the project, or you're not prepared. And then shame on you. And the other thing is to realize that at the end of the day, they may say no, and fundraising is a place for strong egos because they may say no. 3 to 7 no's to get to yes is kind of the watchword in philanthropy at colleges. So, you know, you'll get through the half an hour. They might say no, but they're not going to eat you. So I don't think you have to worry about anything from a perspective of being in some sort of imminent danger. All right, let's get into the meeting. Next slide, please. Sales theory tells you that you have to be careful with small talk. You have 30 minutes here. You have promised them 30 minutes, and you will be out in 30 minutes. Now, you always schedule the fact that you'll have an hour and a half, because the fact that you promised them 30 minutes doesn't mean they may not wish to talk longer. So never schedule something with a backup right behind this for you. You'll talk as long as they wish to. That's part of the deal. But you promised them, and you will be prepared, and you will have practiced to get through this entire thing in 30 minutes. So I suggest we do business first, small talk later, because sometimes the small talk can be very compelling, especially if you have a volunteer in the room, and next thing you know, they're talking about sailing, and then their kids and their grandkids, and you're through 20 minutes, and you don't have the time to do your presentation right, so you rush it, and it's not a good situation. So I prefer to walk in and say, wow, that's really interesting what you have on the wall. I promised you we'd be brief. Let's get this business done. We'll have some time at the end to talk about that, but I'd like to know more about that and what camp that is that your kids are at. So let's get this on with. They know why we're there. Game on. Let's go. Usually start with some sort of a testimony. This is the same thing like your elevator speech. You hit them with the fact that they may not know. That makes them want to know more. So you provide your testimony, your elevator speech, and then you lead into, we have an exciting project, one we hope you'll find compelling. Now, you may find, if you're not there to ask them for money, people think you're there to ask them for money even if you're not. So you may even wish to say, I'm not here to ask you for money. No, you're here to ask me for, no, I'm not here to ask you for money. And you might even want to say, and I've used this a lot, there'll be a time I will be back to ask for money, but not today. Today I want to hear what you know about the college, and then you move into a series of knowledge questions. Even if you are there to ask for money, and they say, are you here to ask me for money? Then you might say, let me give you an idea of what's going on at the college, and at the end we'll talk about a role that you might be able to play. But you don't want them to jump too quickly, because you want to be able to give the explanation to put your project in the best possible light. As with sales, we generally start with a series of knowledge questions. You want to get them talking. You want to get them telling you what their concerns are. You want to get them to talk more than you do. Next slide, please. Because the idea in sales or in fundraising is that you listen for the gift. You listen for the sale. Next slide, please. 75% at least of this meeting should be listening. Gerald Pennis says out of your 30 minutes, you've got 11 minutes is the max. I think it's more like 8. Because what you need to do is you need to hear what their motivations are if you don't already fully know. And if you do, you need to hear them restate them in public. What they're passionate about, what they know about the college, what they think about this particular project. And always in this motivation, you probe for concerns, because objections give you the chance to turn them into shared objectives. Where if you don't turn them into shared objectives and they don't voice them, they remain objections that may then kind of taint your ability to get the actual gift at the end of the day. So we want to be listening, we want to be hearing, we want to be paying attention. And we're not asking them questions like, you know, hey, how are you today, that nobody really cares about the answer. You're asking them questions that you care about, knowing how they feel, whether they give you money or not. So that's an important part of being in the fundraising mode, is that you're asking them questions you need to know the answers to anyway, even if they do or don't give you money. It becomes kind of a different thing. And during this period, you're going to find out whether or not your timing is right. You have to make a decision as you're having this little bit of conversation. Do we move into an ask? Do we not move into an ask? And you have to know about the timing. Next slide, please. So how do you know the timing is right? Well, there's a number of indicators about timing, that how you know if it's right. how many objections are you getting? And past the point, if it's just one after the other, there may be more spade work to be done here. If there's a total inability to engage, if you find them drifting aside, if they're answering emails or taking phone calls, that's really bad. But if you can't get them engaged in the yes responses and to find that common ground, then maybe it's time to think about whether we're going to force it here. Because remember, if you ask them and they say absolutely not, then you can't come right back. You have to build that relationship some more. So if you think you're close, you may want to end it on your own and do a follow-up meeting. Get them out to campus, which I think is wonderful, or one of those other, less acceptable outcomes. But if it's not right, then don't push it. But if it's close to being right, or if you don't think it's wrong, then I think it's time to go ahead. Like I said, they're not going to cut your head off if they say no. Next slide, please. So we're kind of at the moment of truth. This has been a great opportunity to chat, and we're hoping here from I can't give you all these options. This becomes this great flow chart, which gets like spider webs on it because it gets out too many possible decision loops. But let's assume, okay, it's been a great visit. We're so pleased that you're interested in this project. Is there a role you can take in this effort? Now, you may not be able to say that. You may have to go back to least acceptable. Maybe would you come out and see what we do on campus? I really like you to come out when the culinary arts students are having a luncheon and see the quality of the students that we have. I'd like you to come out and see our nurses, depending on what the area is. So you may get the campus visit. You may have to go least acceptable. You may get moved to the ask, but you're ready at this point in time. So let's assume, to kind of get into this, that they say, "What do you want me to do? What are you asking of me?" Next slide. So here are moment of truth. We've got through the case. You've stressed the relevancy, the drama, the urgency. You've told a couple of stories, not just statistics. Remember, in an ask situation, there's only one group of people really interested in statistics, and they're a very small percentage of the donor population. People want to help people, not to help your statistics. You've told them how important their leadership or participation is. The 30-second difference now is to ask them, would you consider, can we count on you for an investment, not a gift, of $50,000 in the nursing project? Now, that wasn't 30 seconds, so where's the rest of the 30 seconds? That was probably 7 seconds. Here's the toughest part. Next slide, please. That was 7 seconds, it truly was. The 23 seconds is you have to now be quiet. And for those of us, you can imagine me, just not even seeing me, it's hard for me to be quiet. It's harder for presidents. It's tougher for volunteers. It's really hard for board members. You have to be comfortable with silence. You have done your best shot. All you can do at this point, if you continue to talk, is either to oversell or to undersell. And I will tell you in a moment what the next thing is likely to come out of your mouth. But you've done your best job. You've given them something very heavy to think about. You've asked them for a bunch of money. Maintain your eye contact, maintain your interest. Don't look away. Don't, be nervous and look at your shoes. Let them speak next, always. The next step is theirs. If you say anything, you're more likely to say than any other phrase that will come out of your mouth, but whatever you can do will be fine. And you've just cut your ask from $50,000 to $500. This is the problem we have with pledge cards. Look at pledge cards. You put a bunch of ranges on there from $1,000 down to $50. Well, aren't you saying that $50 is just fine? And don't you wonder why maybe so many people give $50? Well, because it says right there, I can be in this by returning it with $50. Don't do this in the fundraising ask because you will undersell yourself. I've seen it done way, way, way too many times. It's a nerve thing. So after the ask, just be quiet. Bite your tongue if need be, but be quiet. Let them speak next. Next slide, please. So after the silence is broken and they've said something, they may ask you a question. They may talk about pledge periods. When you ask people for money, don't say, can you give us $100,000 over a period of 3 to 5 years? That's not your question. Your question is, can you invest $100,000 in this project? Let them tell you if they need more period of time, a longer period of time than that. It's not your place. If they want to write you a check for it right now, I negotiated $1 million gift with a donor that they wanted to make the ask over a 10-year period of time based on what he could do. We didn't let them do it, and as it turned out, he had just sold some farmland in Kansas, and said, I'm willing to do this, but for my tax purposes, I need to do it over a 3-year period of time so I can fully utilize the tax deduction. And we talked about other ways of utilizing tax deduction, but that's the way he wanted to do it. So we got the money in 3 years versus 10 years, so let them talk about the pledge periods and assure them when they say, my goodness, that's a lot of money. Oh, well, we can do it over a period of time. So, but don't give it up first, because let them think about the amount first and then how to do it. They may ask who else is part of this, and if they're the first person you've talked to, then tell them they're the first person that you've talked to, and because you really valued their input and how important their leadership would be as the owner of the largest hospital or president of the largest bank or someone who cared deeply about their students or the person who attended all the basketball games last year, whatever. If they say yes, then you thank them and then you go to small talk. You still have time left, and then you can take your leave. Don't oversell after you're done, because your adrenaline's really going to be pumping if they say yes. So at that point in time, you can talk about, hey, I'll get back in touch with you about, pledge payment times or pledge periods or letter of support, but you've done your thing, so don't go on from there. Next slide, please. Okay, I've got about 10 minutes left, I think, so let me, more than likely what you're going to hear are going to be objections. Oh my gosh, I pay my taxes. Why do I need money? Why didn't you give you money? I heard you're changing missions, that you're gonna drop this, you're gonna add a 4-year program. You're gonna be competing with University of Arkansas now. Why are you doing this? Why are you building a building on campus? You can get that empty Walmart on the other side of town. You need to get your money from the state. All these kind of things. Well, how do you object? How do you take care of this? This is where you should be nervous, because they're going to ask you tough questions. What you should have done before you went to any of these calls is to do something I learned from a hospital executive that was on my board. Every time there was a potential crisis or was a crisis, they got the leadership team together and said, let's ask ourselves the top 25 toughest questions that we can. They asked those questions, and then staff prepared answers to them, and the board evaluated those answers. Now, they did this in a very short period of time, but then they all went out in the community singing from the same song sheet. You need to do this as well. What are the toughest questions you can ask? And answer those questions so when you walk in there, you're not nervous because you already have the answer, and your volunteers have the answer, and your staff people have the answer. The way you turn objections around, this is sales theory, is feel, felt, found. Empathy, I know how you feel. Felt, I felt the same way, or I know other people have felt the same way, but what I found with, which is the resolution. So, $100,000, that's a lot of money. Oh man, this is where your volunteer says, I know how you feel. I felt the same way. But when I talked to Chris, and we felt that it was important for us to make a statement. And we found after we made this gift that it's really helped us in many ways, because it's helped focus our philanthropy, whatever it might be. Feel, felt, found gives you a chance to restate the case, why it's important, why it's urgent, why it's relevant to them. And that's always where you want to go back. That's your elevator speech. Importance, urgency, and relevance. Next slide, please. So if they didn't say yes, but they say after these objections, and we may have 5 or 6 or 7 objections, and you go through them all, always when you're 5 minutes away from your 30-minute period saying, I realize we're getting close to our time. Can we come back and talk about this some more? I'd like to make sure that we've answered all of your questions. But let's say that they give you a different answer. Man, I got to think this over. I'm not sure about this. That's a lot of money. Well, then you should say, as I would hope you would say, of course you should. I've asked for a significant investment. We think it's really important because you give them one more urgency statement, and then you set the next meeting. How about if we come back a week from Tuesday? We have some time left that week. This is where I suggest that you don't have your PDA and you don't have your laptop. You actually print out your Outlook calendars. You have some blocks of time already available because you probably will have a follow-up call to make. So be ready for that and go ahead and schedule like you did the first time. Here's 2 different dates next week. And what they may try to do here is to put it off, because the longer they put it off, the less likely is you'll follow up. Try your best to get that meeting set. I'm willing to give it. It'll only take 15 minutes. How about before Rotary next Thursday? How about if we meet at the club on our way in, whatever it might be? If they just exactly say, no, absolutely not, you're wasting your time here, well, then do a little forensic research. Be Columbo. What was it? May I ask, was it the amount, the project, the institution, the timing? Just so you'll know, because, you are in the middle of this campaign. You're going to talk to a lot of people in the community. It'd be really helpful knowing how important they are to give you some insights into how you might proceed better. Next slide, please. Always arrange a date for follow-up. Do not leave a pledge card. Send a confirmation letter afterwards confirming their pledge over time so that they have a written document. You have a written document that you can put into your pledge cycle in your software at the college. But don't leave a pledge card. Find a way to get back. Drop back by them. If they, just leave me a card and I'll fill it out. If you do that, you will lose perhaps half of the gift that you've just asked for. So arrange a date for a follow-up. If you need to meet with a spouse or an advisor, have your calendar with you. Always get that taken care of. Next slide, please. And don't do this. Here's my compendium of death phrases. Well, since you gave to the Humane Society, we thought maybe you'd do the same thing for us. No passion, no empathy. What is it you do? These have all been asked in my presence. What is it you do? Because the president didn't read what we sent him. But whatever, I mentioned this, whatever you can do is great. I'll have my assistant follow up. No, if it's important enough, you'll follow up. And would you consider membership in this giving club? People don't give to be in a giving club, to be a platinum member, to be a whatever it might be in your campaign, unless it's to be with someone else that they value or they care deeply about. But what they're going to consider membership in is the passion, is the vision of the future that you're going to share with them. Next slide, please. So always remember, the best people out there, the best people who are asking for money, they are organized, they call on the right people, decision makers. If you go to a company, you don't want to call on the PR person or the head of the foundation. They're paid to save money. You want the CEO, you want the board chair, you want people who are there and involved. The best askers plan. They have objectives. They listen. They empathize. They share their excitement. They encourage people to raise questions because then they find out more about them and to see how the project can actually fit in with where they're going. They spell out the return on investment. And this is a whole nother presentation, but there's 3 different kinds of return on investment. There's a financial return on investment. This is good for our community because every student earns 10 times their salary, whatever it might be. There's a societal return on investment. Will make our community a better place to live. And there's an emotional return on investment. You should be proud for doing this. And depending on your donor will depend on how you put things into those 3 different axes. Which one do you specify? Is it the financial return? Is it the social return? Or is it the emotional return? It's very, very important, and that's worthy of another hour at some other time. And the best askers ask for the commitment. You'd be surprised how many people go out there and just choke up at the very end. That's not your best askers. Next slide, please. So just remember as we talk about these things that every big gift is important for more than it seems. Why? Because a big gift gets big gifts. Hammock's rule of 3 is if you get some large gift and you promote it in the right way, you'll have 2 others in the next year. And that works with plan giving, and that works with gifts of property, and it's worked with campaign funds, it's worked with endowments. I just promise you that that's how it works. Take my advice. Remember, too, it takes the same amount of work to ask for $50,000 or $5,000. That came from one of my board chairs. We always debrief our board chairs when they finish their term because I promised them they'll leave our board a better volunteer for other organizations. And I asked him, what did you learn? That's exactly what he told me. Because it's the same amount of time out of his life. Why wouldn't he want to hunt big? Because he's used to doing big deals, because she's done this kind of thing in her career all of her life, and because they want to make a big difference. Remember that no means not yet, not now, wrong person, wrong ask, wrong amount. And all this stuff actually is fun, rewarding, and exciting. It truly is, because you're out there making a difference for your organization. Next slide, please. So here's your homework. You thought you were just coming to the session. You have to do homework now. Go back to your organization. Write this down. Make a list of 5 prospects or underrepresented donors and rank them by their linkage, interest, and ability, how they fit with your organization. Pre-plan a visit with your volunteers. Match the top 3 of these 5 with some sort of project ongoing on campus, like your fundraising activities now. Develop your strategies, do a solicitation, and evaluate how you did. If you put these in order and look at them, you'll have a better idea of how to approach the next 5. And when that is like, rinse, repeat, you just do it and do it again. Take 2 every day, call me in the morning, and see how that works. And if things don't work out well, then reevaluate or call me on the phone. I'll try to help you. Life is good. Next slide. Besides your homework, here's a couple of books that I think you should take a look at. These are both small. Gerald Panis wrote a book called Asking. I gave it to my board. He's actually written several books. I've given most of them to my board. But his book called Asking is very good reading. You can read it in about 2 hours. Jeffrey Fox is a sales theorist, and he's wonderful. He wrote a book called How to Be a Rainmaker. It's a great book. It's the Jonathan Livingston Seagull of sales. You can read it in probably 40 minutes, but you'll read it 6 times. Once I stopped underlining the important parts, I realized I'd underlined the whole darn book. So those are 2 important books I think you may want to take a look at. Jeffrey Fox, Gerald Panis. They're kind of the gurus here. Next slide. That's it for me. That's what I have for you. I think I'm right on an hour. Julian, do you want to open up if there are any questions? Is that have you received any or anything we need to discuss from here?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Perry, for this very informative and thorough discussion about fundraising and all the nuances therein with regard to making the big ask and a variety of other very useful tips for all the participants. I think, as promised, we were going to open up for some questions here at the end. And there are a couple of ways, again, to ask your questions. You can simply raise your hand, and I can select you, and I can either unmute you or I can ask the question for you. So let's see here. So we've got one. We had one hand raised, and I guess I'll open it up now. I believe Doug Rouse, you had your hand raised.
Oh, sure. I typed it in, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I was just real quick. Would you mind touching on a little bit of some moves management strategies that have worked well for you in the past?
Well, yeah, we track moves at my college. Moves and just briefly, moves are how you get people from no information at all to the college in a series of organized steps to where they're an integral part of the college. We looked at move management as being every move had to either be a personal conversation, it could be a telephone call, sometimes it was emails. That's becoming a little more acceptable. But it was an action that you could say actually move this person closer to an objective. So the first objective for us was always get them to campus in some way, was to find a way to get them to campus. So that was a big move. From getting them to campus was getting them to be involved in some way, and there were moves then around that. Then the next phase was getting them in touch with the president. So they had that conversation. Then it was actually getting towards the prospect, the actual identification of the solicitation and getting that call. So we kind of identified those concentric rings that we were moving through, and they were generally always centered around, we had the information up front on ability. We kept a ranking list of a couple of hundred people that we organized, because you can't get to everybody all the time, that we would organize by our priorities, and sometimes we had those moments where everybody knew people who were on the list, and if you're out in a function, this is why presidents and especially development officers have to be out at functions. Last night I was at a function here at an art museum and bumped into the president and CEO of our largest bank in the state, who remembered me from an earlier time in my life and was able to update on him on what I was doing, and got a meeting set up with him to go talk about my current project. And also got a chance to meet with the head of their foundation to talk about how maybe our foundations could work together. And they're both on the list. So it's important to have those lists so that you know when you're out to see somebody. When you walk into a room, and there's a whole other session, but the moves of working a room are really, really important, and most people don't work rooms well. So in moves management, it's saying, this is a person we need to get somewhere, and you track them on a weekly basis, or maybe a bi-weekly basis. Has there been a move on somebody? Has there been a move in the last 30 days on the same people? So the moves that we've worked on have been really more the structure and the discipline of doing them than actually what the particular move is. Because if you don't track them, it doesn't happen. That's why they have, why they use software, Salesforce, and things like that for salespeople. Their job is about tracking it, and they say that they, from the old days of moves management, that all boils down to when you come in on Monday morning, how many phone calls do you have to make? Because you should know from your statistics that it takes 25 phone calls to get 10 visits. It takes 10 visits to get one gift. And if your goal is to get $100,000 in a 6-month period and your average gift is $5,000, you can tell exactly how many phone calls you're going to make. And that's where I think moves management is important, is the discipline. Not so much necessarily the tactics, as they'll come out of that, but if you don't have the discipline to set it up, then what's going to happen is you're not going to make the phone calls. the average fundraiser, we did a study of the folks that we had, and although they were technically in their job description 100% fundraising, which meant solicitation, cultivation, and recognition, some of them were spending 20 to 30% of their time actually in that because they got pulled off on this project and that project. And so we did have metrics for number of asks and size of asks, and we kind of got that from the four-year college, and it took a while to get that culture change. But it's really important. If you don't measure it, it doesn't happen. If you do measure it, it does happen. So measuring moves is really, really important.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. We've got another question. And I think the question has to do with, the other question is, on the slide before the visit, what does make your gift first mean? If, Perry, you can recall from memory going over that part of the presentation, what does make your gift first mean?
Well, make your gift first means if you're the college president, you're the first person in your institution that has your gift made for the campaign. And if you're the asker, you have to have your gift made first. So I guess maybe it should be make your gift before. So, you know, I'm as a paid fundraiser. I could never shade the truth to tell people that at the end of the day, although I stayed where I was for so long because I truly believed in the mission, it still fed my family. But I had to make my commitment first. And you know, my $1,000 was as much from some people I was seeing as asking them for $100,000. And so making your gift first means that before I come and ask you to do something, I've exhibited that same behavior. One of our best fundraisers was not a wealthy person. She was actually quite modest. She'd been with the college for a long time, had retired, but she gave proportionate. You know, I know that she gave back 2 or 3% of her annual salary, so she could ask anybody for a comparable kind of gift. And she had us in her will, and she had made a planned gift. So, you know, making your gift first means that you can go out and ask people to do the same thing.
Great, thank you. Another question is, I guess, how do you? And I know you spoke to this a little bit during the presentation. How do you prevent yourself from asking a smaller gift when you're kind of leading up to a much larger gift? I guess another way of asking is, how do you help coordinate internally? You know, who is engaging whom with regard to making asks, so that someone else from your team perhaps doesn't engage in a funder for a grant at a much lower rate than you were hoping to ask for, say, 6 months or a year from then? How do you kind of help coordinate internal kind of asks and who you're engaging?
Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, we had software. We have software that we use that people could see, depending on what their clearance was, certain bits of information. So we always wanted to make sure that everyone that would be in an asking kind of position knew where we were and kind of who owned whom, if you will. So a lot of the software allows you to put a solicitor along with the donor. So for us, you know, Ivy Tech is a multi-campus, multi-divisional kind of organization. You know, we were one college for the whole state, so we had 28 campuses. And so there were a lot of people who could go both on local and statewide basis, and had, you know, some people had a connection to a company in a different area because of what the company's business was, and it was important to give them that place. So for all the people on the inside part of fundraising, we had that list, and you could always pull up a donor or a prospect and see who they were assigned to. So if it was Perry's assignment, then didn't mean that you couldn't necessarily go see them. You had to talk to Perry first to coordinate it. Because if they're 31st on my list, I may not be there for 6 months, and asking them to come to an event might be great, and I want to sit with them. But so that's how we coordinate that. If you're out of the fundraising inner sanctum, if you were, you didn't go out and ask for money without running it through somebody who was. And that was, you know, at Purdue University, for example, they run a 3-step process. This best I understand. I didn't work there, but understand this. First time that happens is you have a meeting with the head of development. Second time that happens, you're put on probation. Third time, you're fired, because it's that important. So you wouldn't have people out in the community doing press releases without marketing knowing about it. You also make sure people aren't out asking the community. So when you have small student clubs and things like that, they're expected to go through their faculty, and the faculty are expected to check with their development officer before that happens. It's just that important. I mean, I have sat in the room where We were waiting. We had a $55,000 ask ready. They're going to give us a piece of property. We had it all set. It was all ready. We're just waiting to see the CEO. Out comes the head of the Culinary Arts program, who just sold them a table at the Culinary Arts dinner. When he walked in, they said, you know how we work. It's one gift per 501c3 per year. We just made our gift. Sorry. And we lost the gift. And by the time it came up, that piece of property had been sold and we lost it. So, unfortunately, we had a wonderful example that we could use, and we used it often, and we told that story a lot because it's really, really important. So if you're not in the fundraising inner sanctum, you know who to check with before you do, and if you don't do it, you're kind of disciplined because it's that important. And we have to treat fundraising as important as anything else out in the community, or we look like we don't know what we're doing because we don't.
Great. One additional question is, are there any tools or resources that you can recommend to help colleges and organizations kind of do a cost-benefit analysis of a fundraising effort? So a typical example would be we're going to spend all this money on a huge gala because it's going to be well worth our time and resources because as a result we're going to get in X number of dollars, which historically I know can kind of be a challenge and is a little bit of a false premise in having those large gala events. So are there any tools out there to help organizations do cost-benefit analyses in terms of developing fundraising efforts and what they hope to gain and what they should put in?
I don't know if there's specific software. I mean, there are groups out there that do, kind of return on investment analysis. What's your college provide back to the community? What might a certain campaign provide back? When you get down to the special events, really to get into the area of where you raise big money, special events, actually all of them really lose money when you consider the staff time. So with special events, you have to consider it's getting the right people there, and it's one of your moves. So the great question that came in earlier is how do you measure your moves? Well, if you're doing a special event, you better have a lot of moves there and have the right people there, because special events are basically a way of transferring money from one pocket to the other. By the time you figure all the staff time that's involved in it, and the time you spend on donors to get trinkets, to be given away or raffle things, it's a lot of time. So the people who raise the big money probably aren't doing events. It's more of an alumni activity or someplace where you lose money creatively. In evaluating what the major gift kind of fundraisers do and the ROI, it's pretty simple. You look at what it costs you in total cost, and you look at what you get out of it at the end of the year, and it should be, for a beginning fundraiser, should be at least their salary, 2 or 3 times their salary, and for more seasoned, there's some documents out there. University of Idaho has some things on the website. I think Purdue has some of their stuff on the website. You can look up metrics for fundraisers, and you can see some great things out there about how they evaluate people. Now, realize when you evaluate fundraisers in that kind of way, you're treating them a little bit different than the rest of the staff who probably aren't evaluated in quite the same way. But then again, you're compensating them for that kind of workload. But I think there's more just doing the algorithms. I'm not aware of specific software to do that.
Great. Thank you. Well, we've got about 2 minutes left, and you've all been extremely gracious with your time, and Perry, certainly we appreciate all the detail you put into your presentation and your responding to the various questions toward the end of the presentation. I'm just kind of combing through right now to see if we have any other last questions before we close. I do want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and we will post it on ATD's YouTube channel for you all to listen to later. And also the presentation, the PowerPoint slide itself, ATD can share that as well, and we'll post that on our resource page. And we can send a link to you all to access. Again, apologize for us getting started later than anticipated. Again, I was talking to an audience, I think of 2, myself and Perry, for a good five minutes or so. So thank you again for your patience with the late start and for joining us today for this webinar. And Perry, thank you again. We certainly appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for it. It's hard to listen to a webinar for an hour and a half, harder than giving it. So thank you for your patience. If I can do anything, you can email me if I can be of any assistance after this through Julian and his group.
Great. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful afternoon.